Президент Российской Федерации.
Please welcome President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, President of Algeria, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, and the moderator of the plenary session, Dimitri Simes, Honorary President of the Center for the National Interest in Washington and presenter at Channel 1. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to welcome you at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum at the plenary session. This is where we're going to have two distinguished and very interesting speakers. There will be a keynote address to be delivered by the President of the Russian Federation and the President of Algeria, His Excellency Abdelmadjid Tebboune. As for His Excellency President of Algeria, I will introduce him separately very soon. And as for President Putin, well, I guess there is no need in introductions, be that either for this audience or any other audience elsewhere. No matter what is your attitude towards his actions, well, these actions provide for strong emotions and sentiment all around the world. And universally, President Putin is considered to be a truly historic figure, and the decisions taken by this person are of paramount importance and are decisive for the destinies of Russia and the future of the whole humankind. President Putin, the floor is yours.
Friends, Mr. President, ladies, gentlemen, from the outset, I would like to welcome our friend, the President of the Algerian Republic, for having found the time and for coming here to today's event. Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, guests from outside Russia, certainly my statement is mostly going to be dedicated to Russia's development as well as our plans along different avenues. But I believe that this is going to be of certain interest to you too, because many of you are either already working in Russia or hoping and planning to work here, and so you're not going to be indifferent to our assessments of the current state of affairs in our country, as well as our plans in order to understand whether to deal with this. And I think, and I hope that this is going to be of some interest to Mr. President as well. My apologies in advance if in certain parts of my statement I am going to address primarily the internal audience. But what we are doing currently in our economy might be of some use for other countries and might serve as a foundation for our cooperation. Once again, I would like to welcome the participants and guests of the 26th International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. I spoke here last year and shared my vision of the challenges Russia and the whole world were facing, and I dwelt in detail on our actions meant to ensure steady, long-term sovereign development of our country. I would like to remind you that the second quarter of last year became the most difficult one for Russia's economy and for Russia's business, because back then circumstances were changing rapidly, as well as the routine methods of trade, settlements, logistics, the very fabric of economic life was being rewoven. As of now, colleagues, we might be confident in saying that the strategy which was chosen back then by the government and by the business in Russia has yielded results. Positive macroeconomic trends are gaining momentum. In April this year, Our GDP grew by 3.3% year-on-year, and by the end of the year, it will have gained more than 1 percentage point. At least that is the IMF assessment, 0.7%. But I believe, and I agree with our experts who believe that it's going to be up to 1.5 or even 2%. This will allow our country to keep its place among the world's leading economies. In April, we have documented an increase in industry and in retail sector, and incidentally, the manufacturing output from January to April stood superior to last year's figures by 2.9%, even though this was the field that came under the heaviest blow due to the rupture of cooperation ties. But what has allowed us to secure these outcomes? Because a year ago, the sentiment, including in our business circles, were very wary, and few could have anticipated how the developments would play out. And amid those conditions, it was very important to provide our business with support, reinforce their trust in the policy pursued by the government, and to underline the dependability and steadfastness of fundamental market institutions such as freedom of entrepreneurship and guarantees of property protection. And that is why, when speaking at the forum last year, I formulated our values with regard to economic development amid new conditions and for the long term. And I can tell you that what I'm talking about is the outcome, the fruit of our collective work, the government, the economic bloc, and the rest. And everything that I spoke about, what we prepared and then went on to implement, all of that has worked, has succeeded. Let me remind you what I'm talking about. First, we've managed to keep a well-balanced fiscal and monetary policy. An efficient combination of these two tools has allowed us to reach minimum figures for unemployment as well as for inflation. Currently, the inflation rate in Russia is inferior to many other Western countries. I talk about the Eurozone and other regions. It's very close to historic lows, standing at 2.9%, whereas the unemployment rate is at 3.3%. Such low figures are unprecedented in our history. What's important is that a stable macroeconomic situation has turned into our competitive advantage, as well as an important driver of our growth. And I have to tell you that inside our political discussion in previous year, there were many reproaches addressed to the government. Why cling to these macroeconomic parameters? You've got to be bolder, take action. Practice has demonstrated that it was not in vain that we were seeking that macroeconomic stability. Taking advantage of fiscal tools and monetary instruments, we've managed to prop up demand in economy, thereby providing work to our enterprises and companies and avoiding prices from spinning out of control. And in future, we will tailor the macroeconomic policies to real conditions, and also keeping in mind target inflation rates, just as we used to do last year and during the pandemic, when the demand and economy started to dwindle. And to prop it up, we increased the deficit of the budget up to 3.8% of the GDP, even though the ensuing year there was a little surplus of 0.4% of the GDP in our budget. I would like to point out that currently our public finance is well balanced. Yes, there is a small current deficit of the federal budget, but it's largely due to the carryover of scheduled expenditures to an earlier date. We did it deliberately in order to accelerate the pace for implementation of government-run and regional programs. Certainly, we have required additional funds to reinforce our security and defense and to purchase weapons. We have to do that to protect the sovereignty of our country. And in general, I can tell you that even from the economic standpoint, it proves to be reasonable. A couple of words about the dynamics of revenues from non-oil and gas revenues. From January to May, they grew by 9.1%, which is higher than expected. In May, another plus 28.5%, and I would like to underline that I'm talking about budget revenues that are not related to the export of oil and gas, which is a very important indicator, telling us that the real sector of our economy, as well as the manufacturing sectors, trade and services, are developing and gaining momentum. The Russian part of the audience are certainly aware that we have always been at it. How long are we going to be dependent on oil and gas? And it seems this trend is gaining momentum, but I'm still going to talk about oil and gas. There are some things worth taking note of. Secondly, the financial capabilities of our government give us a chance to stay the course towards social justice, reduction of poverty and inequality. Our main emphasis is an important factor of successful faring that we showed when dealing with the problems last year. And of course, if we look at the most disadvantaged citizens, we will see that their income over the year rose by 30% in 2021. 1.7 million people managed to break through the poverty threshold, and the poverty rate stood lower than two-digit numbers, namely 9.8%. Of course, each and every percentage point is very important, and the positive trends that I have just spoken about in practical terms maybe are not as significant, especially for those people who've just crossed the poverty threshold. Their income is still very low, but still this is the general trend which we have to support and keep. We work at an accelerated pace to indexate the pensions and social benefits, increasing minimum wages and minimum subsistence level as a result. In the fourth quarter last year, our citizens' real disposable income started to grow again. So far, the growth is modest, but this is a trend nonetheless, and this year we wanted to get stronger. I hope that this will be the case. This helps us support demand, and this in turn internal production and services, especially enterprises and regions on the ground. This in turn has a positive impact upon regional budgets. The third principle I spoke about last year is the emphasis on the development of private initiative. Last year, there were predictions, glum ones, that under the pressure of sanctions, Russia would have to revert to a self-isolated command economy. But as you know, instead, we've chosen to expand the freedom of entrepreneurship, and life has demonstrated us that this has been the right choice. An important stimulus, an important impetus to our business is the replacement of transnational corporations that have left the Russian market. Unfortunately, they buckled under the strong political pressure of foreign political elites. You are very well aware we never chased anyone away from our market or from our economy. Quite the contrary, we proposed that they should weigh very carefully all pros and cons, think about their Russian partners, as well as potential consequences, and each and every partner of ours had a choice. But what's important, because the thing is, under many foreign brands and trademarks, products were being sold totally and completely produced based on Russian capacities. So basically, these are Russian goods bearing a foreign logo. So now that the owners of the trademarks have left, these goods are still being produced. Yes, the logo is different, and the revenues from this business stays in Russia. We will help new Russian owners, will provide income to the employees as well as to the related industries and contractors. First, our entrepreneurs were very anxious because of the withdrawal of Western companies, but right now they're taking up freed up spaces and malls and some small niche marks, as it were, that used to sell clothes, footwear, other goods through social networks are opening their own shops. I spoke about that at an event in Moscow. This sector of the economy has seen the exodus of foreigners who freed up to 2 million square meters of surface. And also, this market is to the tune of 2 trillion rubles or so. And that's good, because all of that has been replaced by Russian business people. Just during 1 year, last year, Russian producers filed more than 90,000 applications for trademark registration. Apart from clothes and footwear, this is mostly software, household chemicals, perfumes, and cosmetics. I won't open any secret to you, because in the course of cooperation with Russian entrepreneurs, I hear requests not to let errant foreign companies back. This is the same thing that happened back in 2014 when Russian agricultural companies started to gain momentum. When we met with agricultural companies, they were asking us they were asking whether we would let foreign companies back. And they said, please don't let them back anytime, because we will do everything. And I have to be frank, our agricultural producers are quite successful last year. The growth in agriculture was at around 10% in all goods. We are satisfying all of our needs, and we're also exporting quite actively. Be that as it may, I can tell you that should foreign producers desire to get back to our market, and such talks are becoming increasingly numerous, we are not closing the door. The door is still open. We are not afraid of competition, because competition, as is well known, is the driver of progress, and we will create a good environment for them in Russia. But the peculiarities of conduct of some of these partners, this is something we are going to keep in mind in future. And of course, we are going to prioritize the interests of Russian business. Incidentally, those who stayed and who are working and who want to continue working in Russia, well, we treat them as Russian producers, and we will treat them as our own. And for all of such companies, the Strategic Initiative Agency has launched a special yearly competition which is going to award prizes to the best trademarks. The first round is going to finish very soon. There are 10 nominations, more than 5,000 bids from across the country. I'm confident that both participation and victory in this competition is going to be a very good challenge and support for our entrepreneurs. It'll help them reinforce their positions in the market and increase investment to new capacities and jobs. And I call upon regional leaders to help these new developing brands. They need that. Last year, Russian companies increased their investment into fixed capital in real terms, and the same applies for January, March this year. And given last year's high baseline, we see that investment are in 2-digit numbers. Our banks are also very active in terms of investment, and their capital has stood the stress test. Just in 2022, 14.3% growth was seen in lending to lawyers, to legal entities, and in terms of lendings to citizens, the growth was 9.5%. And in April this year, lending to legal entities grew by 17.1%, and to individuals 12.9%. And this is a good thing. And of course, mortgage is also growing at a very fast rate of 18%. And another important factor of investment activity is the lifting of infrastructure restrictions. We develop transport and also the logistical networks and the infrastructure. This is the fourth principle I outlined last year. A systemic, consistent approach in this field is yielding results. Construction works are expanding 5 years in a row. The dynamics is very good. In 2022, we saw an increase in construction by 5.2% from January to April this year, an increase of 7.5%. We are going to continue to build and renovate infrastructure, car roads, railroads, flyovers, bridges. We're going to remove the bottlenecks, expand the capacities of our seaports, and also border crossing checkpoints. We're going to prioritize the north-south corridor by 2025. We plan to double, and by 2030, triple the export flowing through this route. In May, as many of you may know, our Iranian counterparts and we concluded an agreement on the construction of the missing railway link in the Iranian territory. We're also involved in bottom dredging operation at the Volga-Caspian Canal. This year, it is going to be able to accept vessels with a 4.5-meter draft. As far as the eastern route is concerned, by 2025, its export cargo flow should rise by 1/3. By 2030, it should increase by another 100 million tons as compared to 2022 level. Another important avenue to pursue is the increase in the throughput capacity of the Baikal-Amur mainline and Trans-Siberian mainline. This year alone, it should increase by 15 million tons, rising to 173 million tons. I would like to take this opportunity to point out the successful activities of the government and the Russian railways, who managed to organize an efficient withdrawal of containers from the Russian Far East. As a result, we removed gluts and also decreased the load for the Russian Far East terminals, facilitating thereby the supplies of goods and spares from Asian countries. In the next 5 years, we are going to renew our merchant fleet, and the Ministry for Trade and Development has already made amendments to the large-scale shipbuilding program. We're going to use the National Welfare Fund for that, and we're going to build no fewer than 260 vessels in 2023-2027. We're also going to continue with the construction of our icebreaker fleet, because we need that for the Northern Sea route. Last year alone, 34 million tons of cargo was carried through the Northern Sea route. Next year, we believe this volume is going to increase several-fold, but for that we need to work at an accelerated pace to develop the railroads and also the infrastructure of the Murmansk transport hub, as well as other Arctic ports. I would also like to say that we are working comprehensively to overhaul the regional infrastructure and raise the connectivity of our territories. Last year, we repaired more than 20,000 kilometers of regional car roads, built and reconstructed 1,200 kilometers, and these are record numbers, and I would like to thank both construction workers, engineers, designers, and workers for their responsible, efficient work. And we are going to keep at this level and raise the bar even higher. We've got everything we need for that, and I'm hopeful that we will rise up to the task. We're also developing communication and telecommunication lines. Last year, more than 3,000 kilometers of such lines were laid. And the plan for this year is more than 9,000 kilometers, so 3 times as much as last year. I would also like to remind you that by 2030, we need to provide high-quality communication networks and also internet access to all settlements in our country with a population of 100 to 500 persons. This is not just about raising the quality of life, because the development of regional infrastructure creates new opportunities for businesses, in particular in tourism. Incidentally, last year, internal tourist flows grew significantly. The Statistics Service tells us that The number of Russian tourists in hotels grew by 16.7%. In absolute numbers, it's almost 10 million people. We need to develop high-quality infrastructure for recreation in our country, and we need to do that actively. And we should not be simply guided by the current figures, because the tourist flow is going to continue growing, and that is why I need to suggest that we should expand the program for concessional lending to hotel projects, especially the most in-demand segment, those hotels that have either 3 or 4 stars. We need to include in that program the construction of all-year amusement parks, water parks, ski resorts. I know businesses are involved in implementing such projects in Crimea, the Russian Far East, Siberia, the Caucasus, and the south and central part of Russia, and we will continue to support these projects. Right now, we see an expansion of recreation in modular portable hotels and cottages and so-called glampings. Last year, we allocated 4.2 billion rubles for the construction of such modular hotels, helping 174 projects in 20 regions across the country. But as life has very well demonstrated us, such demand is far bigger, and investment projects have already been prepared, land plots are there, infrastructure is ready, so I suggest we should allocate an additional 11 billion rubles to support the construction of modular hotels. This will allow us to implement another 470 projects of such type, with 9,000 chambers, and people will have a chance to get acquainted with our unique nature, historical and cultural legacy. The development of transportation corridors and logistics capacities of Russia will allow our business to strengthen its foreign trade ties, cooperation ties with the Eurasian Economic Union, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Open economy is our most important fifth principle. Despite all the difficulties last year, we did not switch to the path of self-isolation. Rather, we expanded contacts with reliable and responsible partners in those countries and regions that act as the drivers of the world economy as of now. And I would like to emphasize that these are the markets of the future, and everyone understands that full well. Leaders of these countries do not give in to external pressure, which is often very presumptuous. They are guided not by someone else's, but rather by their national interests. And with the countries of this type, the volume of our bilateral trade has increased by dozens of percentage points, and sometimes several-fold, and they continue to grow. And this is yet another testimony to the fact that common sense, the verve of business, objective market laws are far stronger than the current political climate, and that means that the unsightly, essentially neo-colonial international system has ceased to exist, whereas the multipolar world order is getting ever stronger. This process is inevitable. In general, last year, our trade export achieved new record highs, rising to $592 billion. One-third of that export was non-commodities and non-energy products. And what's hiding behind that figure is 6.4 million jobs, as well as 2.2 trillion rubles of tax payments to the Russian consolidated budget. I would like to point out that the supplies of our agro-industrial sector have reached new highs, rising to the tune of more than $41 billion. For 10 years in a row, Russia, unfortunately, is among the world's top 5 grain exporters, and starting from 2016, we are the world's biggest supplier of wheat. And we have grounds to believe that this year, too, our companies are going to make yet another step forward, achieving new record highs in terms of wheat exports. That said, Russia is going to take an active part in ensuring global food security, providing aid to those countries, and African countries too, that are suffering from shortages of food. From January to April, we have a surplus in our trade balance of 22.6 billion US dollars. It's a little more than the first quarter. And in 2022, the surplus of our current accounts stood at $233 billion. I would like to emphasize that these resources has to be actively employed for the benefit of Russia's economic development. We need to import cutting-edge equipment and technology, spare parts and materials. I would like to request that the government and the Bank of Russia should come up with concrete proposals on using the funds Russia's getting from high levels of export to stimulate investment, how to expand these investment into systemically important projects in infrastructure, logistics, and territorial development. These projects will allow us to expand the Russian business capacities across a wide range of sectors, raising its competitiveness, including in global markets. But of course, in these markets, Russia has not only partners but also ill-wishers who have grown accustomed to getting excess profits due to their dominant and monopolist position in the market, and they don't want other countries to have an alternative to their aircraft, vessels, medicines, banking systems, technologies, and other goods and services. But even such participants of the market do not need any rivals, and this is why they're putting spokes in our wheels, trying to contain new centers of development. As they say, they're trying to cancel them. But such attempts are only leading to Western countries canceling their own business reputation, and that is a steep price to pay. Unfortunately, they forget about that sometimes, I'm afraid. Russia has always been and will be involved in the world economy. We have drastically facilitated our foreign trade, decreasing several times the fines for the violations of currency legislation, and we removed those fines in certain types of situations, and this moratorium is going to be extended for another year, 2024 namely. During my recent meeting with the representatives of Business Russia, a business association, colleagues have raised this issue of amnesty and forex. And I will be frank with you, this is not the approach we usually take, but it's become usual for Western counterparts to break their obligations, and this has compelled us to accommodate our business in this field. And that is why I suggest we should declare an amnesty for the businesses on forced forex violations, which happened during the moratorium. And we have to close this issue so that it will be impossible to bring business to account retroactively. We are also accelerated the reimbursement of VAT for export products. Right now, it's 8 days instead of 3 months. We are working together with foreign partners to create new mechanisms for cross-border payments. We are facilitating the opening of bank accounts for foreign companies in Russia. Sometimes personal presence is not going to be required. Of course, all the norms of the anti-money laundering legislation have to be respected. We have also achieved great progress in using national currencies in foreign trade. And this is a very big topic, because 90% of our settlements with the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union are in rubles, and more than 80% of our settlements in China are denominated in rubles and renminbi. We're also developing our trade in national currencies with other countries. Our priorities include BRICS countries and the SCO. We have a whole range of tools to support our foreign trade in agriculture, in industry, in other sectors. These tools are scheduled to work for a very long time, and we're going to extend this program to 2030. That said, we need to expand and advance and improve the instruments to support our exporters. They have to be more convenient for our businesses. Right now, our businesses are hitting new, friendly markets. But these markets are new, and they have some particulars, and this is something we've got to take note of, and we will do. We need to take concrete decisions on ensuring export supplies and on using factoring. This will be yet another help to our producers and suppliers. This will provide additional guarantees for their transactions with foreign clients. We also need to promote Russian products using e-commerce platforms because their client base is inexorably growing, both in Russia and abroad. And we are not among the top economies in that regard, but we are not lagging behind either, and we've got some good prospects. So I would like to request the government to launch a range of instruments to support e-trade as soon as possible. I also want the government to analyze the efficiency of such instruments, working together with SMEs in order to improve such instruments. I would also like to tell you that we've got our own successful e-platforms. We have to help them hit the markets of China, India, Turkey. And this will be to our mutual benefit because our products are going to be more accessible to foreign markets, whereas the Russian clients will have a bigger choice of goods and services. Distinguished colleagues, in the face of unprecedented challenges, Russia has not abandoned its principles of economic development. I said that already. By collective efforts, SMEs, entrepreneurs, big companies, government authorities, we've managed to preserve the sustainability of our economy. This is a fact, plain and simple. And we've also kept our position as an important part of the global market, ensuring the stable functioning of real industries and many enterprises. We have helped millions of Russian families keep their well-being. And our key systemic task is not just to make up for the downturn in the GDP or to replace foreign companies that have spared us their presence, nor is our task to simply sit out the fluctuations in the global economy. As I said previously, I would like to reiterate, colleagues, that the world is undergoing radical, profound, and irreversible changes. Amid these conditions, we need to forge ahead, and ahead only, which means that what we need is proactive economic policies that can be built and implemented in close cooperation with our business community and with our entrepreneurs. Basically, I refer to transition to a completely new level of development. I'm talking about a sovereign economy that is not simply responding to market conditions taking account of demand. It is an economy that shapes this demand. Such a supply economy, as it is often dubbed, implies a large-scale increase in production capacities and also in services. It implies strengthening of the infrastructure, acquisition of cutting-edge technology, creation of new industrial capacities, in particular along the avenues where we have not yet fully realized our potential. But we have that potential. We need to tap scientific, creative potential. Such a model of supply economy requires several tasks to be addressed. I have already spoken about record lows of unemployment rates in Russia. This is something to take pride in. But this achievement has the reverse side, too. And companies represented here understand full well what I'm talking about. I'm talking about difficulties related to the recruitment of employees, to deficit of human resources, and that is why the supply economy needs to advance the structure of employment, and we've got huge reserves we need to tap into. And for that, we need to retrain our employees and workers. We have to raise the economic activity of our citizens so that people could realize their potential and promising sectors. And wherever they live, they need to find a decent job. I would like to draw the attention of the government to the situation of those regions where unemployment rates are high, even though generally unemployment rates are very low. Still, there are regions where these rates are high, so we need to provide people with more opportunities and information technologies. We also have to expand competences in remote work. Next year already, federal support will be provided to regions with limited budget resources. No fewer than 10 such projects are going to be launched. A case in point, this is just an example. It's School 21, organized by SPIEF. I can't but applaud similar projects. Moving on, we need to make sure our higher and professional schools are oriented towards results, namely successful employment of its graduates. And to achieve that, first we need to introduce key performance indicators for our education institutions, and the main indicator is the quality of employment for its graduates. And based on this approach, I suggest we form rankings of such education institutions. And secondly, I suggest we should draft a 5-year estimate of needs at the level of our economy so that we could adapt flexibly to the ever-changing trends and new demands in the labor markets, and of course to our priorities in economic development. So I would like to request the government to come up with proposals on developing such an instrument as a learner's contract. This learner's contract stipulates that the employer sends the employee to retrain or to go through additional training, and instead there is a guarantee that the employee will get a better job. This is a very good stimulus. High quality is required, and we need to increase salaries and wages in order to effect high-quality changes in the labor market. On a separate note, I would like to mention such an important indicator as the minimum wages. Its indexation is continuing at an accelerated pace to boot, and we need to increase the gap between the minimum wage and the subsistence level. Starting from January the 1st, 2023, the minimum wages rose by 6.3% to 16,242 rubles. Starting from January the 1st, 2024, there's going to be another indexation by 18.5%. So starting this year, it was 6.3%. Next year, it's going to be 18.5%, which is going to be far superior to the inflation rate and to the rates of income growth in country in general. And this is going to have a positive effect on the income of 4.8 million rubles. And by 2030, minimum wages should rise in nominal terms at least twofold. This is going to be an additional impetus to increasing wages across our countries. We're also expanding measures of social support targeted to civilians, to citizens, especially families with children. And very often such benefits are tied to the income of the person. And should this income rise, albeit negligibly, then the benefits stop. So there is no incentive for the person to search for a better position or for a better salary. We need to change this situation. Government support should not be a replacement for the salary. It should be a complement. And of course, given the low unemployment rate, colleagues, this will drive people to search for jobs. We need to search for such incentives. So I suggest that the child for families with children under 18 months and the one-off child benefit should be paid regardless of whether the income of the family has increased or not. Furthermore, I propose supporting citizens who are caring for children with disabilities. Right now, they're only entitled to a benefit if they do not work, so there is no other source of income. So if they want to have a side job, they cannot do that because otherwise they will lose the benefit, and we need to remove these restrictions. We need to keep the care benefit, all while ensuring partial employment of these citizens. And to make sure there are no discrepancies, we need to enshrine in legislation the notion of partial employment. And I would like to request the Parliament to make the necessary amendments as soon as possible. Another important avenue for economic development is the expansion of entrepreneurial activity, because small and medium enterprises in Russia employ more than 28 million people. Starting from 2022, the number of self-employed doubled, rising to 7.6 million people. We need to support people who want to make business and are only taking their first steps, especially as part of the social contract, which is used for launching one's own business or having a household plot. And I think it would be the right thing to do if a participant of the social contract could get additional competences based on the My Business Center. Of course, the government is going to pay for that. During one of the last forums, I proposed launching an umbrella mechanism for lending to SMEs. I talk about special guarantees from the SME corporations if the entrepreneurs do not have the collateral to get a credit. This mechanism is working across the regions. More than 39,000 credits have already been issued to the tune of 350 rubles. This is a good mechanism. In 2022, as compared to 22, the number of credits with underwriting for manufacturing companies increased 7 times, and 46 times for entrepreneurs in the IT sector. And of course, the demand is much bigger in industry, tourism, and information technologies, so I suggest we should expand this resource and extend the mechanism for umbrella underwriting mechanisms until 2030. And I would also like to instruct the government to set the target limits. Mr. Silvanov, I'm not talking about concrete limits, but I would like to ask you to work this through, because this is a real mechanism which helps us with the lending. I also believe we need to expand the scope of this measure. We need to include such a category as SME Plus. These are companies that cannot be considered big, but despite certain difficulties, they've managed to grow over the recent years, but due to formal criteria, they cannot apply for government support. But they are in a very important stage of growth, and they need resources, and these companies need special measures of support. So I would like to ask the government to work these measures through. On another note, there are companies that break through from the category of small and medium enterprises, and they lose the right to concessional and preferential tax treatment. So the tax burden starts to increase unless they get preferential tax treatment as part of a program for the big business. I'm not going to say anything new, but we see a situation where there are not that many incentives to grow, to go into a new wage category, because that's simply unprofitable. So by hook and crook, companies are trying to stay in the SME sector. Sometimes they resort to fragmenting their businesses in order to keep the tax benefits. The tax service sees all of that. I don't know, Mr. President, whether that happens in Algeria, but this has been happening in Russia for many years now. I think people are the same everywhere. They will always find a way out of the situation the government has put them into if there are real restrictions on growth. But what I'm talking about are the realities of our today's life. So in that sense, there's no point in trying to catch anyone red-handed. What we need to do is to stimulate growth, removing barriers in the way of the businesses' growth. We need to help them grow stronger, create new jobs, and we need to set the stage for a smooth transition to new categories for businesses. I would like to ask the government to come up with proposals on this subject early next year, and that should include a special transition preferential tax treatment for them. Another important measure to support entrepreneurship is related to restrictions on inspections and other oversight mechanisms. Last year, we introduced a moratorium on scheduled inspections on all Russian businesses. Then it was extended for the current year of 2023. As far as entrepreneurs are concerned whose activities do not carry high risks of damages, the moratorium will be enforced for them until 2030. As a result of this measure, last year, across the country, 339,000 inspections were carried out, which is by 20% less than in the COVID-19 year and 5 times less than in 2019. This is a very good indicator, but still there are some provisos, as it were. I'm going to talk about that. If the businesses are not related to high risks of dealing damage to the environment or to citizens, then they should not be subject to inspections at all, either scheduled or extraordinary inspections. Preventive measures will suffice. Mr. President, these are the decisions we arrive at based on our cooperation with the business. I'm sorry that I'm taking so much time, but maybe this will be of some use to you to get acquainted with our business practices. Next year, we will assess the effect of the current measures I'm proposing. But I believe that preventive measures will suffice. Whereas next year, we will continue decreasing the administrative burden on the companies. I also believe we need to keep working on such an instrument as the business climate transformation, which seeks to create a conducive environment for business people across all Russia's regions. We have already fostered contacts with the business associations, and at their initiative, we introduced amendments to the legislative framework. This year, we've updated roadmaps in industrial construction, export, corporate management. In the near future, I would like to ask you to do the same for urban planning, high-tech, and AI, as well as in tourism and intellectual property. I would like to remind you that in the past, in order to assess the business environment, we used to resort to the World Bank rankings, and there were some good results there too. There is some common sense, a very good incentive that stimulates competition. Such a ranking is worth using. We shouldn't abandon this idea. But we need to have objective criteria that allow us to have a look sort of from outside to assess our progress. That is why I instruct the government to work together with business associations and the Strategic Initiatives Agency to come up with the Russian domestic model for key targets at the national level, using the best practices from across the world to go step by step and to implement this model in practice at the regional and national level. Of course, the most important criterion from the point of view of the business community is the improvement of legal application and decriminalization of our penal legislation. We need to remove blurred formulas in the legislative framework and the so-called elastic articles. We need to bring to a minimum the number of cases when investigations disrupt enterprises and lead to collapse of these companies. I spoke about that on many occasions, but I would like to remind the business community and assure you that we are not abandoning this project. We're going to keep at it. A year ago, I floated a number of initiatives in this field. Many of them have become laws. Some are currently under discussion in the government and the parliament. It's hard to find a compromise, but I would like to ask colleagues not to drag their feet and to provide us with some outcome decisions. A number of proposals I would like to make based on my meeting with the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs and with Business Russia. I'm talking about those norms of penal legislation that either simply overlap with the Code of Administrative Offences or are no longer valid. For more than 10 years, we're not resorting to the thresholds for significant and very significant property damage that is not related to theft and related to copyright and related rights, because right now foreign companies refuse to supply their software and other services. So I think these thresholds have to be doubled at the very minimum. And the same goes to economic crimes, for which no imprisonment is prescribed. I'm talking about, for instance, avoiding the disclosure of information under the legislation on securities. On a particular note, I have said that the number of business inspections has decreased, but I made a reservation there, because right now business people say that instead of oversight companies, they have law enforcement agencies coming to them. There are no violations, but they still come and try to find some foul play. Sometimes this must be justified, but what we see is basically a substitution of notions, because we say there are not going to be inspections, but inspections are still very much in place. It's just they bear a different name and other people come, and this undermines the trust in the oversight mechanisms, and this affects their work. If inspections are kept, they have to be carried only by the competent bodies. So I would like to ask the government to work with the Prosecutor General's office and the Interior Ministry to enshrine this norm in our legislation and to closely follow the application of this norm. This is of the utmost importance, because otherwise there's just no point in doing what we're doing. We need to put this all on paper. As one comedian said, we have to be very careful and prudent. We have to work out through all the legal minutiae. Next, the business climate in Russia, both for emerging businesses and mature businesses, have to be globally competitive. As I said during my address to the Federal Assembly, the business and key industries and sectors and the management sectors have to be in the Russian jurisdictions. Of course, each and every business person has the indefeasible right to decide how to use the profits. This is the driver of entrepreneurial activities. This is the reason behind any business. But there are situations when money is made in Russia and then is moved to foreign accounts, and this carries obvious unacceptable risks to the Russian businesses themselves. Many business people have felt that and have this first-hand experience, because to their astonishment they saw their assets in the West frozen. And it would never have occurred to anyone in the past, because this happened in violation of all domestic and international norms. So it's just robbery, square and simple. They don't want to talk about that. This is as if we moved back to the medieval times. But there is a very good adage in our country. You have to be of good use where you were born. And that is why I appeal to the business community. Work here, invest your money here, then the profits are going to be bigger, the money is going to work actively in the country, and the economy, and the social field. It'll be for the benefit of our citizens. This will be a very good use to your country, and moreover, it's going to be more reliable. Right now, there are many Russian assets registered to foreign companies. The owners are Russian citizens, and they want to get back to the Russian jurisdiction. And it is for their benefit that we have launched 2 special administrative areas in Primorsky Krai and in Kaliningrad region. Here, the companies can protect their assets, keep the usual system of corporate management, and they can also resort to a number of tax preferences. And I know that not everyone has taken advantage of this opportunity. There are different reasons. Some couldn't get the legal or accounting services abroad, and some cases there is unwillingness and reluctance on the foreign partners' side to provide the necessary documents or information. So this is sabotage. They don't want to release our assets and our entrepreneurs. So I would like to ask the government to work with the business community to accelerate the return of Russian assets in key industries to the Russian jurisdiction. In particular, the procedure should be facilitated for transferring business from other countries to Russia and to special administrative areas, especially in those cases when such a transfer is blocked by the foreign side, and sometimes it's just not stipulated in their legislation, and this has to be done by December this year. At the same time, we've got to launch a mechanism to protect the rights of Russian citizens and legal entities, especially if these are foreign companies, but the ownership is organized through foreign shell companies or front companies. You know, sometimes someone wires money from one offshore account to another, the new owners and beneficiaries appear, and then they are protected by more offshore accounts. Frankly, when you look at that, you come to pity them because they put their foot in it, you know. They got trapped. So we have to think how to help them. It might seem these are personal difficulties because it's the consequences of your personal decisions. But the thing is, these are companies and people who work in Russia, and these companies give jobs to our citizens. Investment is produced here. So we have to help the owners of such businesses. We have to give them a place in the Russian jurisdiction. I'll be frank and straightforward. We have to help them. Distinguished colleagues, another key avenue for the supply economy is related to investment growth. We need to ensure a greater inflow of investment into industries, priority industries. This year, the level of investment should rise to no less than 2 trillion rubles. By 2030, it has to increase fivefold up to 10 trillion rubles. We have already come up with a whole range of tools, agreements on the protection and promotion of investments, special investment contracts, the Industrial Development Fund, and industrial mortgage. At the end of February, we've launched the so-called cluster investment platform, and the participants can get concessional lending at a rate lower than the central bank's key rate, to the tune of up to 100 billion rubles. The underwriting is provided by VEB. Subsidies is provided to R&D, especially in modern technologies. The emphasis is on upscaling the production. In 3 years, last year there were 160 such projects with a special emphasis on chemistry, LNG, and hydrogen energy. Of course, we do not need to produce all goods and all services in country because it's impossible for any country in the world, nor is it our goal. We need to have our own solutions, however, in critically important areas. We need to build reliable cooperation networks and and technological partners. We look forward to working together with colleagues from friendly countries, with partners from the Eurasian Economic Union, BRICS, SCO, and other associations, and we have to provide a better financial basis for private investment projects. We have to make these resources more available to businesses. We've already launched the project Financing Factory. It's currently helping 26 projects to the tune of 1.8 trillion rubles. They include the construction of a mining and metal plant in Zabaikalsky Krai, a coal port in Primorsky Krai, fertilizer plants in the northeast and the far east, modernization of airports and energy facilities. Another 7 projects have been approved to the tune of 345 billion rubles. This is an instrument that is in demand, and we need to launch new tools to help the technological sovereignty of Russia. The government has already adopted the decisions to that end. We are going to launch an umbrella guarantee program under the VEB aegis to the tune of 200 rubles. According to our estimates, this will allow us to decrease the rate for investment credits by 1.5 percentage points. And if a project is chosen by the factory, then it automatically gets underwriting from VEB. And we need to tap into the potential of the Russian stock exchange. At a recent meeting with the Russian Business Russia, we agreed to send bonds that give you a title to share in the revenues of the company, and they can have different maturities, sometimes indefinite maturities. The central bank and the government, I hope, will swiftly implement this idea, and we need to attract shareholder capital. With the participation of VEB, we'll launch a special instrument, and VEB is going to assume a huge part of the risks. At the earliest stages of the program, it's going to be 200 billion rubles, but even that volume alone will help us unblock investment to the tune of more 2 trillion rubles, and we shouldn't drag our feet. The first projects should be launched as early as this summer. Now, as for the circulation of corporate shares in our market, as I said during my address, we support the IPOs for high-tech businesses. Right now, the government is working on tax preferences for the issuers and purchasers of such securities. But in order to give an additional impetus to our shares market, we made a special decision, which is related to a situation when foreign owners are selling Russian assets. In such case, part of the shares of the company whose owner is changed should flow into the Russian stock exchange, and we need to create incentives for additional inflow of money to our capital markets. The long-term savings of our citizens can be a very good source of such money, and these need our support, and especially under the insurance system for voluntary pension accumulations, because the government guarantees the return of a sum of up to 2,800,000 rubles, and we need to make sure that our citizens can get money inside the country. We know that sometimes our money, Russian money, was in suspense abroad. In Moscow, in St. Petersburg, investors can get not just a land plot, but also all the necessary communications, as well as a full package of tax rebates and preferences, but that only concerns capitals and a number of big regions. Some regions in Russia simply do not have this opportunity because their budget is very much limited and they need support. We need to develop the infrastructure at an accelerated rate, and they need to get support through the so-called infrastructure menu. A special emphasis should be made on budgets, on regions with small budgets. We need to provide our regions with equal opportunities for providing preferences to new projects. What I'm talking about, I am going to give an explanation right now. To stimulate new business initiatives, some federation subjects, some constituent bodies of Russia can introduce an investment tax rebate. But the thing is, so far the mechanism has not been tested properly, and not all budget of our regions can afford to defer payments for the sake of future payments. And that is why we need to recalibrate this tax rebate and make sure it helps reinforce the technological sovereignty of our country, primarily in regions with smaller budget capacities. I would like to ask the government to work this issue through with the Commission of the State Council of Investment and the business circles to relaunch the mechanism next year with updated parameters. We need to provide long-term budget credits on concessional basis to the regions. We know the risks involved. There can be an overload and also excessive credit burden. This will all need to be carefully thought through. Let me reiterate that we need to take into account the interests of business development. At the same time, we've got to strike a balance with regional budgets. Regional management teams play a leading role in setting up a modern business environment. As is tradition, I would like to speak about the regions that have made the greatest headway in the national investment climate ranking. 60 regions have got upwards in the ranking. The best dynamics have been demonstrated by the Chechen Republic, Rostov, Saratov, Kostroma regions, Yamal-Nenetsky Autonomous District, as well as Zabaikalsky Krai. Congratulations are in order to my colleagues. I wish them further success. Another avenue of the supply economy is raising the efficiency of the real sector and the services, raising labor productivity in Russia through removing bottlenecks, eliminating bottlenecks. All of that can be described by the term lean production. Starting from 2019, we have been implementing the labor productivity national project that encompasses around 6,000 enterprises. More than 88,000 employees have already learned new methods of work. This is already producing some good results in defense industry in particular. It helps us improve the output of weapons and military equipment. Lean production is gaining momentum, not just in the basic sectors of the economy, but in social sphere, and we need to use the Federal Competences Center to that end. Its mandate has to be expanded. Another avenue is automation and AI. Due to objective demographic processes, Russia will see a decrease of supply in the labor market, and that is why we need to raise the rate of automation in manufacturing, mining, agriculture, transport, logistics, trade, and other fields. Russia has a great potential as well as its own efficient domestic solutions. Just recently, KAMAZ unmanned vehicles were launched in the federal highway Neva, and in Moscow there are unmanned taxis launched by Yandex, but these are singular examples. We need to implement these technologies on a mass basis. In November last year, we talked about introducing industrial robots, and we agreed that the government would adopt the decision by July the 1st, and I urge you to strictly abide by this deadline. Another important issue is the data-driven management. This approach has to be adopted ubiquitously in transport, communications, medicine, education, and administration, and so on and so forth. We need to use this groundwork. We need to use Russian-grown software in big data, launch projects in AI, and of course we need to reinforce our information security, and we have to make sure that the data circulation does not damage our national security or the interests of our citizens. We have already agreed on concrete proposals to that end with my colleagues. Of course, we are somewhat lagging behind. We have to catch up, and keep abreast of the process. Very soon, I will listen to the report by the government on this subject. On a regular basis, we consider the introduction of new technological solutions in the Russian economy. We hold a yearly conference on AI. Starting this year, we are launching a new special platform, which is entitled the Future Technology Forum. On a yearly basis, this will serve as a platform to talk about the cutting-edge technological discoveries. Companies, regions, research teams will present their discoveries, share experience, and latest solutions. The first forum is going to be held in July, so very soon they will talk about promising ideas and calculations and data transfer. I invite all of you to participate. Technological changes are happening at a breakneck speed. To be efficient, we need to automate production processes on the scale of whole markets. And we've got some very good working platforms in Russia that are in case in point. I refer to Yandex, especially in taxi, also the automatic lending in SPIEF, and the e-commerce platform of Ozon. But more industries, more institutions have to be covered by these initiatives. And when we build the techno-economics of the future, this should be economics with the institutions that are based on completely new technological principles. This platform principle with regard to data management is actively introduced at the Russian government and across the regions. And in terms of this digital public administration, we are one of the world leaders. This is a fact. We've got to reinforce our positions and move forward. Dear friends, the format of our discussion prevents me from broaching all the issues related to supply economy. I hope that I'm afraid I've already exhausted you, but I have to tell you that the Russian government is charged with working in detail on each and every aspect I've just enumerated. One of the key indicators we are guided by is the inflation rate. We need to secure high growth rate while keeping the price dynamics close to the target of 4%. As you are aware, the Bank of Russia says that by the end of the year, the inflation rate might rise to around 4 to 5%, but containing the price hikes is not just the mandate of the Bank of Russia, because the government has to help by stimulating supply. And it's important to raise the efficiency and the profitability of government and public expenditure. Our policy aimed at supply economy, also at raising the efficiency of budget expenditure. These are the priorities upon which our federal budget for the next 3 years is going to be based, and we are going to talk about that in July at the Council on Strategic Development in great detail. On a particular basis, I would like to say that we said a lot about supply economy, and when there is a supply, we need demand. And the expansion of Russia's economic capacities and its potential have to be directly linked to raising the welfare of our citizens. And this is the very embodiment of economic growth. And I will conclude here by what I began with. I'm not just talking about keeping low inflation and high employment rate. We need to make sure that the incomes of our citizens rise at an accelerated pace. The Russian economy has to be an economy of high salaries, with new requirements for professional education, with higher labor productivity based on automation and new management systems. This should be an economy with high-quality modern jobs and labor conditions. I know that many, well, at least some, believe that high price of labor decreases the global competitiveness of the country. In the past, this view was justified, but it's becoming obsolete, if not so already, because it does not take into account the realities of today, let alone tomorrow, because high-tech is the future of the economy. And it's impossible to achieve high technology by using low-qualified labor. And if it's high-qualified labor, then it should get the proper remuneration. And only there, where we have big salaries and professionals, will we achieve high-quality products, and this will allow us to achieve sovereign equality and also technological economic leadership. The government is accommodating the business, helping it address the most urgent problems with logistics and so on and so forth, and we hope that the business will reciprocate and show social responsibility. I will say what I said recently at the Congress of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, and at the meeting with the Business Russia. We will help those businesses who have long-term plans intended to reinforce technology, industrial and agrarian sovereignty of our country. We will help those who invest money into Russia, who are not trying to pump money out of Russia, those who invest into infrastructure, environmental projects, territories and cities. Russian government support measures have to be tied to raising salaries, improving labor conditions, expanding social packages for the employees, and I would like to ask the government to pay its utmost attention to this issue. Currently, Russia has a very tight-packed and ambitious economic agenda. The difficulties and problems we are encountering are but an impetus to all of us to move faster and achieve a high quality of transformation. We need to improve the quality of life and the welfare of our citizens, and we will certainly improve the sovereignty of our country in all spheres. And we are open to a partnership on an equal footing with all countries, with all those who, just as Russia, cherishes their national interests and who is ready to set their own future course. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Vladimir
Vladimirovich, thank you very much for this speech. And before I pass the floor to the President of Algeria, I would like to ask you several questions. You were speaking about a variety of topics. You provided facts and figures, and you have demonstrated how Russia has been developing under these quite difficult circumstances, and we have heard about its focus and how the Russian economy is developing. Everything has been quite positive, and this is amazing. Amazing because all this is happening during the international tension and the conflict around Ukraine and the continued armed activities there. We all are aware how important your assessment is. What is happening to the troops in that conflict? We see that in London and in Washington, they keep talking about the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And it is obvious that it hasn't been what the West was expecting. I have read a lot about this counteroffensive, and the Ukrainians have been proud about certain successful results of this assault. But you know, Mr. President, all this is happening before they reach the first line of defense. So it means that this defense line hasn't been broken, And we see that all the Ukrainian troops have been eliminated before the real combat began. They say that Ukraine has over 60,000 armed forces, and they are preparing for quite serious activities there. Can you please comment on this? You demonstrated that you remain optimistic how Russia will deal with the situation, but can you please share your vision with us? Recently, I had a meeting with military correspondents and journalists, and there was a similar question at that meeting. And I said that the war in Ukraine, in southeast of Ukraine, was begun by the Ukrainian regime with the support of their sponsors in the West in 2014. And everybody tries to keep silence about it. But I have to remind them about it, because aviation and tanks were used against the Donbass. So this is a war, and it has lasted for almost 9 years. And then the so-called partners and counter-partners, they rejected the peaceful settlement of this conflict. And all this forced us to use armed forces in an attempt to stop this war. And if anyone tries to transfer all this to us and say that we are to blame, but we all are aware where and when it began, we were not pulling their nose. They didn't want to do anything, and they acknowledged this quite recently. And as for the Ukrainian authorities and the Europeans, they were speaking about it quite openly and publicly. So we were forced to use our armed forces, and we had to recognize the independence of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, and they were accepted to Russia. And then we had to support them with military measures. This was number one. And secondly, we see that the Western countries, they take all these drastic measures for Russia to be defeated over there in the military operation, and they do everything they can for this. We have set up certain goals, and we would like to demilitarize and to denazify these areas. As for demilitarization, have a look. Ukraine will stop using their own vehicles and equipment. Everything they are using these days, all this has been brought to this country from abroad. Well, you won't last on this for long. And our defense industry has been expanding every day. And it is a 2.7-fold increase of defense products. This is the increase during this year. And for the products that are most high in demand, there's a 10-fold increase. And all these factories and plants, they have 2-3 shifts, so they work 24/7. And all this shows to us that we have these reserves and we are quite strong. So as for this counteroffensive you mentioned, it's not exactly so. In some areas, the Ukrainian troops, they do reach the first line of defense. They are using their strategic resources. And it consists of several parts. First means to break this defense line. Then they need to move forward. They need to settle in this territory. But they never reached any results with this. And their losses are very high. It is even more than 1 to 10 if we compare it with the Russian losses, the Russian army losses. As for the vehicles and equipment. We see that there are more and more of them getting lost, and it is 186 tanks. This is what they have lost. If I'm not mistaken, 186 and 417 of various armed vehicles. I'm not speaking about people, so the Defense Ministry should provide you with the statistics. So we see that there are no successes in any of the areas. So this is what we hear from the reports from the Defense Ministry. And right now we are meeting here, and near Bremen, right now, there is an assault, and the enemy tries to attack, and there's several detachments, and there's 5 tanks involved, and it is in near Zaporozhye. There are 2 tanks and several armed vehicles. As for the first line, this so they have lost already several tanks, and they are fighting right now, right at this moment. And I believe that the Ukrainian army, they have no chances here. This is true about all other areas and directions they are moving in. Thank you. It is good that maybe none of your statements about Ukraine makes the West so angry when you say that there are Nazi forces which are quite strong in Ukraine. They keep saying in response, what are you talking about? What Nazi troops? President Zelensky is a Jew, and he is a president-elect. And so they speak about everything good coming from the West against everything bad in Russia. So what can you say to these Western voices? I have lots of friends who are Jews, and they keep saying Vladimir Zelensky is not a Jew. He is a disgrace for the Jewish people. And it's not a joke. There's no irony in this, because if we look at the heroes, they refer to heroes of Ukraine. You see, there are neo-Nazis, followers of Hitler. The Holocaust is a time when 6 million Jews were exterminated, and 1.5 million people were killed in Ukraine. And there were Bandera troops killing Ukrainian Jews and Ukrainian people. I expected you to ask me this question, and yesterday, before going to bed, I asked to send some materials to me. I called my office in Moscow. I was here in St. Petersburg already. Have a look. Yaroslav Stenko, head of the Bandera faction, 1939. Moscow and Judaism are the strongest enemies, and I insist on killing all the Jews, and we need to use German methods of dealing with the Jews. Another person. This is the 10th of July, 1941, and this is the so-called Lviv massacre, and his name is Stepan Linkovsky. He was saying, as for the Jews, all methods are appropriate that will lead to their total elimination and extermination. What is this? I was reading the records of an interview of some guy from the Bandera army, and he was saying that they took one Jewish family for killing. And I couldn't even read that. there were tears in my eyes. Okay, so there was a disabled man and his wife and two kids of 11 and 7 years old, two girls, and they just shot them, and they were taking this family, and this disabled man, he realized what was happening, and he was crying, embracing his dog. So, and they killed them all. Can you imagine those two girls, 11 and 7-year-old? 1.5 million Jews were killed there. And I'm not even speaking about Russians and the Poles. And they actually haven't forgotten what was happening in Ukraine. Okay, the Polish people, okay, so they have their own goals. Okay, they want to return the Western Ukraine, and probably they will reach this goal. But we are speaking about the Holocaust. How can we say, how can we neglect all this? I would like to apologize to Your Excellency, President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, but I knew that you would ask me this, and I would like to repeat it. So when I was going to bed yesterday, I asked not only to send me these details, but also to provide me some specific examples. Okay, we keep saying Bandera, so all these anti-Semitic activities, but nobody wants to listen to this because President Zelensky is a Jew. He's protecting all these neo-Nazis. I was talking with journalists. Okay, the monument to Lenin, okay, it was removed. All right, but why did you put a statue of a Nazi activist onto the same pedestal? Dmitri Sergeyevich, I was asking you to prepare some material for me. So is it available? Dmitri, can you hear me? Can we view it? September of 1941, Babi Yar, close to Kiev. During 2 days, 30,000 Jews were shot there, and the Ukrainian Nazis were involved in this. And the Bukovina Kuren, this part of this army, was actively involved in this, and this was their supplementary police forces. And these police forces from local citizens, they were doing all this dirty work. 1942, the Ukrainian Nazis were acting in Belarus, and a symbol of their terrible crimes was the village of Khatin. At that time, the Ukrainian police forces from the same battalion, they brought 179 residents of this village, and they burned them alive. Old men, children, women. They were trying to escape, and they were just killing them with the machine guns. And at the end of the war, there were over 10,000 Bandera troops in Belarus, and it took a while to remove them from there. In spring of 1943, in the area of Volyn, there were several shocking events. At night, the gang of Ukrainian Nazis killed residents of several villages, and they were using axes and scythes, and so they killed in one village almost 180 people, and there were over 50 children from 1 year to 9. So these shocking events, they were reflected in the teaching of Andrei Melnik and Stepan Bandera, even before the war, because they were striving for an ethnically cleansed country, and they were speaking about one party, one nation, and one leader. And in the central square of Lviv, Stepan Bandera was announcing the establishment of this new independent country. And he was saying that the Ukrainian state will be cooperating with Germany, now under the leadership of Hitler, who is helping the this area to remove the Russian occupation. And that was the day when these pogroms began. And in July of 1943, these gangs of neo-Nazis, they attacked over 70 villages, and their cruelty and sadistic approaches remain shocking. So women were stabbed, and they hammered babies. And in one of the villages, the Goshkevich brothers, who were trying to inform partisans, they were gutted, and this was really terrible. And in 1943, 1944, the Bandera army killed from 80 to 100 Polish citizens. And only when the Russian army came here, so they were punished and removed from this area. So we have shown you who was Stepan Bandera and his associates, and they claim that he is a hero of Ukraine. So this is the person who has been protected by the Ukrainian government, and they follow and protect this ideology. We cannot but fight this ideology. Russia suffered greatly in the Second World War, and our losses were the biggest among all countries. And in Israel, have a look what the regular people write in the Russian language. Just check it out, and you will see what the opinion of Jewish people is. So this is definitely neo-Nazism. How else can we call it? So we have the right to consider this goal of denazification is one of the major ones. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to make a comment. Mr. Zelensky, during his brightful career, so he spent some time in Moscow as well, and he was acting on Channel 1 of Russian television. And I was speaking to those people who worked with him, and at that time, no one remembers that he was viewing himself as a Jew. Okay, he's Jewish by origin, but, you know, in the Soviet Union, during the last years of Stalin, there were people like Kaganovich in the government. Okay, their relatives and their wives were Jews, and and in the security service there were generals who were Jews. So, but at the same time, no one would doubt that, okay, there was anti-Semitism during the Stalin time. So it's not an argument if there's someone with Jewish blood in their veins, that their regime cannot be anti-Semitic by nature. I believe that this is definitely not a serious argument. And now I would like to ask Your Excellency, President of Algeria, to share your wisdom with us.
In the
name of Allah, the Merciful, first and foremost, I would like to thank you, Your Excellency, President Putin, for the plan and the vision for development of the Russian Federation that you just shared with us, and we wish you every success in implementation of this ambitious program. As for my country, Algeria, I'd like to start by saying, distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellency, President Putin, and His Highness Sheikh of the Emirate of Ras Al Khaimah, dear ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of my speech, I would like to express my deep gratitude to His Excellency President Putin, who invited me to participate in this very important forum that is taking place here in the beautiful city of St. Petersburg, the city that is world-renowned with its culture, art, and its glorious history. This is a city that is representative of the whole history of the Russian people. I also would like to express my deep gratitude to the organizers of this forum. St. Petersburg Forum has been regularly conducted for many years and is acknowledged and respected all around the world. This is a major event, and right now the role of the forum is becoming increasingly important in a situation of growing challenges that are being accumulated and are being faced by many peoples. And I have to say that one country alone can never contradict and withstand all those challenges. Those challenges require adequate coordination of effort by the whole global community. And in order to find solutions to those problems that the humanity is facing today, Russia is playing a vital role in reducing the acuteness of current crises. Thanks to the current policies regarding the grain deals, the grain supplies that are taking place right now, and where grain is being delivered to the most needy countries in the world. That also includes the efforts to develop cooperation and partnerships with various countries, and first and foremost with the poorer countries. Russia is offering help and assistance to them because those are the countries that suffer most from the current crisis. Dear ladies and gentlemen, cooperation between Algeria and Russia is not limited to trade only. It includes active exchange in the area of agriculture and agricultural produce. That is also cooperation on political level. That includes political consultations between our two countries. And this is where Russia is playing a vital role in various associations of countries that are gas producing, that is such associations as Gas Exporting Countries Forum. And just yesterday, I had a meeting with President Putin where we discussed the problem of development of our strategic relations, and we worked to elevate those relations to a level that would reflect the level of interest that we have. Ladies and gentlemen, Algeria is going through an important stage of its development. This is where we are focused on multifaceted development of our economy. And right now, Algeria is turning into a very important stream of investment. Algerian government is being active on that by providing subsidies and various preferences to attract investments to our country. We prepared a very appealing plan to facilitate development of agriculture, energy sector, and various sectors of industry, including agricultural produce development, processing industry, and many more. We invest a lot in development of green energy. We are also aiming to preserve nature. We are willing to counteract the climate change and make our contribution to the resolution of this problem. We're open for everyone who is willing to support our effort to create favorable conditions for investment. And we're willing to invite investors from all around the world, including Russia, to invest in Algeria. And we're willing to create a lot of preferences for them. And we will create abundant opportunities for effective investments and profitable investments. I also wanted to name just a few recent achievements of Algeria. Just some numbers. Algeria is included in a relatively small group of countries that have virtually zero debt, or zero state debt. And the GDP growth rates in our country amount to 4.3%. And this is much higher than the growth rates demonstrated by the neighboring countries. And this growth rate is set to evolve further. Starting from this year onwards, we adopted a new law on investments. According to this law, there would be specific subsidies and preferences provided for investors. There are also specific clauses on investors' protection, and this is the logic that we were guided by from the very beginning of foundation of our country, of our state. And once this law is adopted, we're going to follow up with a whole number of practical measures. Many of them are implemented already, and those are the measures that will remain in force for 10 years to attract investors and to make sure that they feel safe and secure about their investments. I wouldn't really want to take too much of your time. Definitely, Algerian economy is not comparable in size to the Russian economy. And I thank you for the invitation to participate at St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. I express my gratitude to President Putin, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, and the best of luck to you. Let the peace be with you. Mr. President, thank you very much for telling us more about the investment politics of your country. You've been in power since 2019. You're the 6th president of Algeria, and you're doing a lot to boost and develop the economy of your country. But I also have to say a few words on your country. You have a very special tradition of being independent and fighting against colonialism. As a result of this struggle, Algeria became to be an independent, sovereign state. Today, there is colossal pressure imposed against Algeria. They attempt to force you to join sanctions imposed against Russia in one way or another. You're being forced not to cooperate with Russia, or at least not to purchase Russian weapons. What is your response to this pressure? Apologies. Well, I would respond to this question with one word. Well, Algerians are born free and will stay free. Well, I would say that is indeed an exhaustive answer. It speaks for itself. But if I may, I also wanted to ask you about your energy policy. What are the specific energy projects that are going on right now in Algeria that you would consider to be attractive for foreign investors? Thank you very much for your question. The new law on energy was adopted in Algeria. This is also a law regulating the exploration works, and this is the law providing all the necessary guarantees for those companies that decide to operate in Algeria. That includes, among others, Gazprom and a number of other foreign companies. We provide them with abundant guarantees to make sure that they can bring their capital to the country and get dividends, and of course we are always welcoming all of them. We work hard to create attractive and favorable terms for them, and the current population of Algeria is around 60 million people. The majority of the population are young people, and we need to provide for a bright future for all these people. And the current demographic growth is putting Algeria in a position where by 2030 the population would amount to more than 60 million people, which means that we will have to provide more and more energy, we will need more and more oil and gas. Right now, Algeria is exporting both oil and gas, more gas though, and there are plans to create more processing capabilities and facilities in the country. We are also working actively to produce petrochemical products so that we could export not just crude oil, but petrochemical products. And apart from that, Algeria is consuming about half of all the gas that it produces. So we consume domestically about 72% of gas produced within the country, or well, more or less about half of the gas produced in the country. The current production levels are enough to ensure economic growth. And as it was mentioned earlier by President Putin, right now Algeria is gradually getting rid of overlines on oil and oil dependency, and right now we are working actively to make sure that our export is diversified and is not limited to oil and gas only. Mr. President, thank you very much. And now I would like to address President Putin, since we started talking about dependency from oil and gas revenues. President Putin, if I may, I wanted to remind you just lately the US Treasury published a report where they claim that they have been successful in stopping Russia from selling oil at the international market. Well, the only way to sell oil for Russia now is with 25% discount, and obviously they explain it by the sanctions and limits and price caps that the EU has introduced. Well, my question is twofold. The first one is whether you agree with this assessment from Washington. Is it realistic? And secondly, what do you do to make sure that Russia is paid more and paid better for its oil and gas? First of all, I want to say that any kind of non-market limitations to trade in any sector would be counterproductive and damaging for the global economy, for global trade, and are therefore damaging for those who initiate those processes. And whenever we take certain decisions, and I guess you know that on a regulatory level, we also made a decision that would limit the operations of our companies. They are limited and are allowed to cooperate with those companies that do not impose any limits on us, among others, including in the energy sector and the oil sector. So those who impose those limits cannot work with our companies. And that is affecting global markets accordingly and is affecting price indicators. So after all, those who are being reasonable and demonstrate actual care for the well-being of global economy and global energy markets, by that I primarily mean our partners in OPEC+, well, together with them, adapt those decisions that allow us to minimize the negative consequences for the global energy community and global energy markets. And those implications would come into force whenever there are political decisions being made in the area of economy. Obviously, those limitations have negative consequences on us as well. But first and foremost, for different markets, our discounts are different. That's the first point. And in some cases, those discounts are minimal. Secondly, like I said earlier, all of those discounts are affecting global pricing situation in one way or another, and generally it remains on a level that is quite satisfactory for us. The output levels are growing, and we are also quite okay with it. The domestic output, the sales volumes are decent. Yes, it is affecting revenues to the state budget. That's for sure, and that is also affecting gas prices and sales volumes of gas to the certain markets, primarily European markets, but gradually substitution is happening. Some markets are being replaced with others, and I don't see any catastrophe playing out here. And certainly it is motivating our companies to be more energetic, to search for new logistic routes, search for new partners, and they are finding those partners. That is also forcing our companies to act more professionally, not just deliver a product to a seaport and sell it to the customer. Well, I don't want to talk about all the tools that we use, but we know that assets are being acquired abroad by Russian companies, where oil is being processed on the refineries to turn into petro products. But generally, the Russian market is in a good situation and definitely has bright prospects for further development. Well, Mr. President, and Algeria is part of the OPEC Plus group. Together with Algeria, we are doing consultations whenever we take certain decisions within the OPEC Plus. And I have to tell you that all the decisions taken by OPEC Plus, be that the production cuts, first and foremost, they are completely free of any politics. They are not related to the special military operation or any other market situations or developments. They are primarily conditioned by the economic feasibility, both for producers and consumers. And I would say through our joint actions, we managed to balance the market successfully.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know full well that when the collective West talks about sanctions against Russia, a new element emerges. And this element is as follows. It's not just they need to punish Russia, but also to limit Russia's capabilities, in particular your personal capabilities as commander-in-chief, to mobilize economic resources in order to stand against the collective West in Ukraine. In particular, what they are proposing is not so much strengthening sanctions, but rather preventing others from circumventing these sanctions. And as they like to put it, these sanctions are treated not just at the level of laws, but also at the level of rules. They say, we don't want Russia to have any more money to continue waging war, so they need to be prevented from getting this money. And it's no secret that there is a huge pressure on certain countries, in particular India and China, and also pressure is being exerted on specific companies. What is happening in this field? Is Russia feeling this new sanctions pressure? And are London, Brussels and Washington succeeding in preventing Russia from acquiring the resources needed for the armed war? Well, it's not for the resources we need for the fight. This all boils down to our country's development. As I said, the world is undergoing profound changes. We have started to reorient towards the markets of Asia, Africa, Latin America, but this process did not start yesterday. It happened long before the tragic events in Ukraine. But why so? Because the world economic trends are changing, the leaders are changing accordingly. The pace of trade growth between China and the EU is higher than our growth rate of trade in China, and they say that Russia is going to be dependent on China. But what about them? They have already become long dependent on China. We have good relations, not just good neighborly relations, with China and India and others as well, because over there, other countries are developing at a rapid pace. Take Indonesia, for instance. It's a huge market and it's growing rapidly. The same goes for Latin America. Its development is going to continue. Africa is also a well of opportunities. Yes, there are problems, but they're all on the ascendant. So all attempts at artificially imposing restrictions only do more damage towards those who introduce these restrictions. This can't be a source of joy for us. We're not happy, but this will not do anything to prevent our development. I cited some figures, didn't I? Our trade is growing. The macroeconomic fundamentals are stable starting from the second quarter last year. We have been registering growth. The economy is growing. Right now it's 3.3%. By the end of the year, we will have to see how it goes, but it's going to be 1.5, 2%. Yes, we would very much like to have the same rate as in Algeria, 4, or more than that, or maybe India, because they are ahead of others in that regard. But, you know, making other countries blindly follow someone else's interests, well, that is a tough call. It's very difficult to achieve. How can you make a country with several millions in population, how can you prevent this country from buying grains from Russia? This will lead to hunger. And if some idiot says that, no one will listen to him. And that's the problem. And those who do that will have to come to realize in the end that this is not just counterproductive to some abstract global economy. But it's unacceptable to millions of people. You know, there was talk about the need to protect the environment. But Europe has seen a sharp increase in coal-based electricity generation. And this decision was adopted by the green forces, who were shouting the loudest yesterday about the need to shut down coal power generation completely. And right now they are reviving the nuclear and coal. And you know, in certain European countries there is more coal in Russia. They have simply discarded all their old statements, because in the past economic decisions were absolutely infeasible. So the current crisis in Ukraine is nothing but an excuse to mask their decisions. The mistakes they made in finance, in economy, they are the ones who led to a sharp increase in inflation, because they recklessly funneled millions and trillions into their economy. I think it's 5 trillion euro in Europe, 9 trillion euro dollars in the US, and they are the ones who have led to the spike in inflation, and they are trying to lay the blame on Russia right now, but they're not going to succeed. I don't know what Mr. President think about our cooperation in OPEC+, but I think you will agree that this joint cooperation of ours is absolutely depoliticized. I fully agree with a great friend of mine, Vladimir Putin. All of us, in our economic activities, understand full well that there are attempts to politicize economic decisions, but the economy should not be politicized. So, if you don't mind, I will add something as a follow-up to what you have just said. What we are witnessing currently is a new cold, undeclared economic war. It's not natural in its basic sense, because there is a difference between what was happening back in the early 1950s and what we're currently witnessing. The thing is, the needs have changed, and there are a few countries that produce as much grain as your country, and no one can throw you off your course in agriculture, in agricultural supplies and supplies of wheat. And I do hope that people who come up with these absurd initiatives will get back to their senses and they will pursue a normal economic policy. So, Dmitry, just a couple of words to add. Indeed, making countries blindly follow the requirements of certain unfriendly countries that are fighting Russia for decades on a systemic basis is impossible, because the tools they resort to, well, suffice it to remember the violent events in the Russian Caucasus in the 90s and early noughties. Everyone was casting curses against Al-Qaeda, but when Al-Qaeda fought against us in the Caucasus, they forgot about those curses. If you can use something to fight Russia, well, this instrument is going to be given full use, as they're using Nazis, neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They forgot about them being neo-Nazis. Not a single word is uttered about that. They put a certain person at the head as a figurehead for this Nazi camarilla. We just looked at this video when you see Bandera under a Nazi flag and people are killed. Do you think anyone will see that video there? No, they won't, because there is a full information blockade. They use this mechanism against us, as they're using the energy tools to fight us. They're using the food factor, the financial tools. But let me reiterate, the world is changing and changing rapidly too. And the efficiency of these instruments is going down. And it mostly is to the detriment of those who are trying to use these instruments to fight Russia. As far as tools go, tools are not only used against Russia. They are ascribing the use of a very interesting instrument against the US to you. To a large extent, the US economic position was based upon the role of dollar in the world financial system. And they say right now that you are using this conflict, the conflict with the United States of America, in order to unleash and accelerate the process of de-dollarization. Is it true? And if it is true, what are the results of this process? Meaning abandoning the hegemony of dollar in the world financial system. To begin with, I hope Mr. President is going to agree with me, because our friends are closely following what is happening in this field, our friends in the Arab world and in Africa in particular. And there's one thing I would like to say: never have we pursued the goal of de-dollarizing the Russian economy, nor have we ever had the goal, nor do we have the goal of de-dollarizing the world economy or influencing this process. The influence of this or that currency upon the world economy is directly linked to the economic potential of the country that is issuing this currency. And of course, the world, the US is one of the world's biggest economy right now in terms of purchasing power capacity. The US is in the second place. China has got ahead in terms of the parity, but still it's a great economy, and it's a tribute to the capacity of the American people. They're hardworking, they're talented, but right now the American leadership is abusing the confidence of the American citizens. And I know that full well, and I say that with confidence because I think by pursuing short-term political goals, which might very well be wrong from the point of view of the US itself, they are undermining their world dominance, in particular in the world financial system, because by using dollar as a tool for warfare, basically, they sow doubts with regard to the reliability of the dollar as a means of accumulation of money, as a reserve currency, and also as a settlement means. Right now, big economies are closely reducing the share of dollar reserves, and the settlements carried out in US dollars are also decreasing, and the same goes for euros. But settlements in national currencies, in renminbi, and some currencies of the Arab countries are increasing, regardless of what's happening in Europe. We see that Latin America is coming up with ideas and projects of setting up a single currency, and it's no coincidence that for quite some time there's been talk in the Arab world about setting up a single currency, and the same goes for Asia. We see an increase in the share of settlements carried out in renminbi. The leading oil powers in the Arab world say that they are willing to use renminbi in settlements for oil supplies, and we've got nothing to do with that. But if there are new stock exchanges, in particular oil and gas exchanges, will begin to appear, then this will spell the doom, the end for the dollar, and they're doing that themselves because the current political elites are abusing the confidence of the American citizens, and they are leading to the negative consequences I've just talked about. This brings me to another thought related to another question. You dealt with such Western leaders as President Chirac, as Chancellor Schroeder, as Prime Minister Berlusconi. I'm under the impression that when you look at the current leaders of European countries and maybe the US as well, you see that you have to deal with people of a different caliber. And one stark difference with the leaders of old, whom I'm not going to accuse of having too much of love for Russia, is that those old leaders had a sense of sensible pragmatism. They understood that each force generates counterforce. If you take some risky steps, this might turn to some bad consequences for you. When I see the current leaders of the West, I see that they're sort of divorced from reality. To be more specific, Chancellor Scholz and President Macron are complaining that they do not have enough contacts with you and with the Russian leadership in general. At the same time, they are getting increasingly involved in the war in Ukraine. A question begs itself. Do you think that NATO is part of the war in Ukraine? And if it is the case, it's hard to imagine there is any space for constructive diplomacy. Or am I wrong?
Well, yeah, definitely NATO is getting involved in the war in Ukraine. We see all these supplies of heavy vehicles, and now they are discussing supplies of airplanes. And today I have mentioned already that in one section, there are 2 detachments with 5 tanks they are trying to assault, and there's another assault going on right now. And all those tanks, okay, they hit and they are burning, and these are Leopards, these German tanks. And it was true about yesterday. And those F-16 aircrafts will be burning like these tanks. This is true. And if they are based in some air bases somewhere in other countries, but if they are used in Ukraine, then we'll have to think carefully where we will be hitting them and where and how all this is used against us. So this is a great danger, a danger of the NATO alliance getting involved in this conflict. As for the Western leaders, you know, I never evaluate colleagues of mine, whatever personal relations we might have, because I don't believe it is appropriate. And speaking about Vladimir Zelensky, I never did that. But, you know, it is absolutely unacceptable for me. I cannot understand how they can support those neo-Nazis and how can they move to the level of national hero, whatever nationality these people might have. I never evaluate people, leaders, nobody, and I would like to apologize to everyone here. Recently, Mr. Berlusconi, the former Prime Minister of Italy, died. He had done so much to establish these relations between Russia and NATO member states. He was full of energy. He was such a great person. Really, I believe that that was a world-class personality. And I do apologize. I would like everyone to stand up in memory of Mr. Berlusconi.
Спасибо.
Thank you. As for President Chirac, so this was a person of encyclopedic knowledge. This was really true. And these days, some of the leaders of the countries, they didn't even graduate from a university. But this is due to the specifics of the political system in some countries, because people get to the top, but they don't have this cultural background. Jacques Chirac died, and he was a great political leader. I once asked him, why did the American government, American leaders, behave like that? They were so aggressive and they were so short-sighted. And he responded to me in Russian, and he said, because they are not well cultured. So he said that in Russian. And that was due to the level of the general level of education and background and understanding of the development of objective processes or misunderstanding of these processes. But whatever happens, we have great respect to all our partners, and I'm absolutely sure that the current challenges we're facing, including the security area, will take us to an understanding that security should be equal for everyone. And we have been saying this for a while to all our partners. Mr. President, despite the role of the collective West and NATO in the war in Ukraine, you are not closing the door for the diplomacy with Western countries, and you are open to peaceful settlement. Yes, absolutely sure. Yeah, we never close the door. So they close the door, and they are trying to peep what is happening here, with your help as well. You know, there was an interesting topic. International currencies. So Mr. President, I would like to ask you, what about the Arab world? Is something there that can demonstrate that there will be some common currency in the Arab world, in all Arab countries? Maybe I missed some news in this respect. I would like this to be true. I believe that some currencies were imposed onto the whole world. And I talk on behalf of Algeria. We would like to join the BRICS organization in the near future. We would like to join, to be relieved from certain pressure on our economy. As for this common currency, well, there are very strong currencies in the Arab world, for example, in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And maybe such decisions will be taken that you referred to. We'll see. Life will show. And how do you assess the level of your dialogue with the United States and the Biden administration? He believes that he is the future president, and the former president, Donald Trump, keeps saying that if he had won the election and become a president, then no war would be possible. So what can you tell us? So is there any dialogue with the United States, and what is possible at the current level? As for Mr. Trump, during his presidency, lots of sanctions and restrictions were introduced against Russia, and at that time there were no tragic events in Ukraine. Nevertheless, those sanctions were introduced. And I believe that if there were another president in Washington, then I hope that we would have had another way of developing this conflict, but they rejected it. As for the contacts, we don't have any contacts, practically, but we didn't reject them. If there's a desire to enter into a dialogue with us, they are welcome. It's not us who stopped this dialogue. They moved this dialogue into the sphere of supplying weapons and armory. Okay, we are going to burn all that they have supplied, and then we'll see what we are going to do next. Over 30% of all the armored vehicles have been destroyed already. I'm talking about those that were supplied. It's not only Bradley or Leopards, but altogether, in terms of the number, so 180 tanks, and this includes Bradley as well. So the total number gives us 30% of all the vehicles, and definitely this process will continue. But of course, it would be better if they had used another way, and if they were looking for some peaceful ways of resolving this conflict. We haven't reached that point yet, and they are trying to win in the field there in this war. Well, let them try. I doubt that they will succeed in this. Right. And in Washington, they are quite condescending towards it. So they see that there are attacks on the Russian territory, on the historically Russian territory, and we speak even about the Kremlin. There are terrorist attacks organized by Kiev in Moscow. Daria Dugina was killed, and in St. Petersburg, where the young blogger was killed. And of course, all those drone attacks, including the Kremlin. So we see there's an interesting situation. On the one hand, the Biden administration is quite categorical in saying that they do not approve of such actions, and that they do not promote or facilitate such actions, and they never promoted the destruction of Nord Stream 1 and 2. And at the same time, they don't even try to explain to Kiev that this is something that shouldn't be done. It should be forbidden. So what about this position of the United States? Can you evaluate it, and how are you going to deal with it? You know, everything you mentioned, these are their attempts to provoke us to some powerful counteractions. the attempt to hit and cause some damage to the Kremlin, the residence of the Russian president, and all those assaults on the Belgorod region and villages near the border. All these are attempts to provoke us, to counteract it. So if we destroyed 5 Patriot complexes near Kiev, so what do you think? Can we destroy any building in Kiev? There are no limitations for us, but we don't do it due to a number of considerations. There are many considerations. I will tell you later about them, not in the public. Well, everybody understands it. Everybody expects us to push the buttons. So, but there's no need to do that because the enemy has no success along the front line. And because they do understand it, they try to provoke us to these harsh measures against these acts. And then they want to point a finger. Look how cruel and bad they are. They are pure evil. And they want to inform all our partners about it. So, but we don't do this because there's no need. As for whether we need to be involved in a dialogue with them. But I repeat again and again, we never said no to them. It is them who decided to stop this dialogue. Okay, if they don't want to talk with us, okay, let them be. But they will want to initiate this dialogue, and we will decide what and when we can say to them. As for those territories close to the border, yeah, they are trying to distract us, to distract our attention from that main blow they planned. Okay, they want us to move our troops closer to those areas and so on. But for us, there's nothing extraordinary and unexpected. We'll be calm about it, and if those attacks continue in the borderline areas, then we will consider an opportunity to establish this sanitary zone, sanitary corridor along this line. So, but they need to understand it. We are hitting the military targets, and we use high precision long-range weapons, and we do reach success. You can just take a look at how all those storage facilities with weapons and the manpower are being destroyed. And you can see how our operators hit those targets. So there is a response towards all those actions. Maybe you don't notice it, but it is quite powerful. Well, lots and lots of experts in Russia, not only in Russia, they began speaking about the potential use of the tactical nuclear weapons. Of course, only under some extraordinary circumstances, and we all hope that we won't be in such a situation. I remember when you were visiting Washington in a better time, you met with a number of American experts, and Jim Schlesinger was there, a former defense minister, and also the former advisor on national security, advisor to the president. In the 1980s, they were responsible for development of the American concept of a limited nuclear attack. This was if the Soviet tanks would move towards the English Channel, and they were very competent professionals, and they were saying that it would be not a legitimate military task, but also the only deterrence means, because who will go for it only if there's no any other opportunity to resolve it. But so the tactical nuclear weapons for them was quite an important means of nuclear war deterrence as well. What is your response to this? I'm negative about it. The use of nuclear weapons, theoretically, it is possible, and for Russia, it is possible only if there's a threat to our territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty, and the existence of the Russian state. Nuclear weapons have been created to ensure our security in the widest sense of this word, and the existence of the Russian state. But firstly, there's no need for that. And, all these discussions and considerations, they reduce the level, the threshold for using such weapons. And secondly, we have more such weapons than the Western countries. And that is why they move us towards beginning these discussions. No way. In this case, if we use just the economic terminology, this is our competitive edge, our competitive advantage. And we were discussing it with President Lukashenko. So we are part of this union state. Okay, we were discussing then part of these weapons should be moved to Belarus, and this has been done already. The first. The first have been moved there until the end of summer and end of year. All this will have been completed, but this is a deterrence measure. All those who think about reaching, or they are thinking about Russia and its strategic defeat. No way. You are the commander-in-chief. For this deterrence to be effective, the enemy should at least admit the possibility. If this deterrence doesn't work, then you will do whatever is required by the situation. Do I interpret it correctly, Your Excellency? Mr. President, can you clarify, please, what is he expecting me to say? Do you want me to frighten the whole world? No, I don't want it. I have said already that these measures can be used only if there's a threat towards the Russian statehood. And in this case, all our power and all the means in our hands will be used against it. But the only country in the world that used nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state is the United States. Okay, they used 2 bombs, and it is Hiroshima and Nagasaki cities, and they believed that they had the right to do it. So this is the precedent, and it was established by the United States. Vladimirovich, sorry if you feel that I pressure you to say something. This is my job. Now let's move towards some more nicer topics. Could you please tell us about the position of Russia among the 10 top countries? Economically, according to some estimates, Russia is in the 6th place. Do you believe that Russia will retain this position? Definitely. In the coming years, we will stay there. Yeah, this is if we use the consumer prices parity method. Yeah, so China, Japan, the United States, Germany, and Russia. So these countries are part of this top 10. And this is GDP using this parity index. And Indonesia is approaching because their population has been growing very fast. The economy has been developing, and there are enormous processes taking place there. We heard from Mr. President that the population has been growing and the economy is growing. We have lots of interesting projects they will be developing. And Russia is now in the 6th position in terms of the turnover and this parity. And I was speaking about macroeconomic stability and how the economic situation is developing right now, and about our forecasts. I have no doubt that this 6th position will be ours. Okay, we'll have to look. Yeah, we'll see how we'll be moving forward.
But again, if in the European economy, in Germany, we would witness the negative processes that are evolving right now, and there is an expected reduction of the economy to the amount of about 0.7%. I may be wrong, but I guess this is the number. The unemployment rate is going up, inflation rate is going up. For us, it may be 2.3 now, it may be 5% by the end of the year. And what is the current inflation rate in Germany right now? I'm not sure. It's about 7%. Or maybe 5 point something, but it is considerably higher than Russia, which is unusual for such a developed economy as the ones of Germany. And if it moves on along this trajectory, may we get even stronger and higher in this ranking. Well, one of the economic challenges for Russia is a certain shortage of highly skilled labor force. You've been talking about that earlier. You talked about the measures that are taken to address this problem. One important matter here is that there is a certain amount of people, especially highly skilled professionals in the area of information technologies, decided to leave Russia once the special military operation was started. I get to hear increasingly frequently, not just in Moscow, but also read it from the Western press, that those people are actively coming back. Is that the case? And if it is the case, do you welcome those people back to their country? Well, just lately we had a meeting with the President of the United Arab Emirates, and we also touched on this matter. There are many Russian citizens living and working in the UAE. Maybe there are even more of them in the neighboring countries of Russia: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. You know, I don't see anything bad about it. Well, let people live there where they feel like they want to live for a while and work there. But if it is one thing if you live in Moscow, in one of the best cities of the world, with all the infrastructure that it has to offer, all the social benefits and opportunities, and it is a completely different thing if you have to live in a different city. It's one experience when you live in your homegrown culture, your native language, and sometimes you have to be detached from that. You may be used to live with friends, relatives, your family, people that you're used to, you love, your acquaintances that you get to see and meet from time to time, and it is a completely different experience when you're detached from them. According to our modest estimates, about 50% of those who left are now coming back. Well, some of them still remain abroad. Well, it is entirely up to them, but I'm convinced that this process is more of a positive one rather than negative, because that would be an element of creating additional connection of Russia with those countries that we have good developing economic and humanitarian contacts anyway. And Mr. President, both of you actually, my two last questions to you, to both of you. What would you like to say, not just to the people seated in this room, but also to the broader audience, to the millions and maybe even billions of people who are watching your presentations? Stay healthy, stay wealthy. And President of Algeria, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Well, I would say the only goal for the whole humankind is to live in a world, to live in peace and to pursue progress. We all want our economies to develop, and indeed, we want to see actual integration happening that includes economic integration and closer ties between our peoples. But all the wars, well, there are always losers. There are no winners in the wars because wars bring destruction with them. And that is why I'd like to wish all of the humankind peace, prosperity, security. And once again, I would like to use this opportunity to thank His Excellency President Putin, who was very moderate in his statements today. And likewise, I wanted to say that we are ready to act as mediators to help around the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. And I come to conclusions based on your words, President Putin, that you are a friend to the whole humankind. You are a friend to all countries. Well, just like in Algeria, we love everyone apart from those who are enemies towards us. Thank you. Well, I certainly would like to thank His Excellency, President of Algeria. Thank you so much for finding time to join us today. Everyone seated in this room understands what it is like to travel to Russia now, and especially to be able to join us at this session and be seated with us here at this stage. Well, this is the actual display of truly leadership qualities, of true character and respect towards one's national interests. Russia and Algeria have been enjoying deep, long-lasting, friendly relations. We have a lot of love towards Algerian people, starting from 1954 until 1962 or 63. This country has been at war for its independence and lost about 1.5 million people. And even once Algeria acquired its independence, I guess in 1962, again in 1963, 1964, the French army was conducting nuclear testing in the Sahara Desert on the territory of Algeria, leaving dreadful consequences behind. And I'm happy to say that with Algeria, with many other countries of the region, with the African continent as a whole, with the Arabian countries, traditionally, from one decade to another, we've been enjoying good, friendly relations. So without exaggerations, those are truly wonderful relations. And we see that the leaders of these countries are primarily guided by their own national interests. At the same time, they definitely pay a lot of attention to what is happening, to the current events, and His Excellency just mentioned it. And we've been talking about it a lot yesterday. His Excellency was showing a lot of interest towards what is happening in Ukraine, and now he just stated it publicly. On one-to-one conversations, he was also expressing his desire for peace and was expressing his wishes on the readiness to act as mediator. We are very grateful to you, Mr. President, for your position and for your willingness to help and support our efforts, among others, to find peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian conflict. Thank you very much. President Putin, and my final question, a difficult one, but in the United States that would be a mandatory question to be asked in these situations. Well, in this situation, if you would ask President Biden, you would most probably ask him, what is it that you want to say to President Putin? Well, maybe you have nothing to say to President Biden, I don't know. That's what a US journalist would ask you. But what is the key lesson that you would like President Biden to learn based on what you've been saying in this audience? And broader, What is the major takeaway from the foreign policy of Russia? Well, President Biden is a grown-up person, a mature one, and an experienced politician. I'm not the one to lecture him. Let him do what he believes to be right, and we are going to do what we think is in line with the interests of the Russian Federation and the people of Russia. And everyone will have to live with that and to count with it. All right, President Putin. Looks like you refuse to give any advice to President Biden, but I guess you've just stated the most important thing. Everyone will have to count with it. And I guess this is an important statement that brings us to a closure of this very important, very meaningful meeting, and my gratitude goes to the presidents of Russia and Algeria. That was indeed a discussion that was truly exciting. Thank you very much for the work we've had today. Thank you.